salesmanship as statesmanship. This was a center page article in the Hindu day before yesterday. Nobody has seen it. I'm very disappointed. My ego is completely shattered. I thought all of you would have come prepared having read that article. Because it was not only a reflection of the current foreign policy of Mr. Narendra Modi, but with references backwards. So if you read that, or if you haven't had the chance, I would recommend that you read it because it's available on the net. It is called Salesmanship as Statesmanship. So my argument is that today in foreign policy we are moving away from statesmanship to salesmanship. And I have given evidence to show that, and this has been generally appreciated all around except by the hardcore BJP, which thought that this was a criticism. But it was not meant to be a criticism. I have not made a value judgment. I have not said this is right or wrong or good or bad. What I have said is that we now have a new foreign policy. We must realize that. So it is not only in form or not only in eloquence, but the approach of India towards the world and our foreign policy in particular has changed. If you have not noticed it, this is high time we noticed it. That was the purpose of that article. There is no criticism there. But referring back to what India stood for, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, about whom reference was made here, made our foreign policy. And he was the most appropriate person to make our foreign policy because he knew India very well. If any one of you has read Discovery of India, you will know that this man knew the pulse of the people of India. And he also knew the world very well, if you have read his book, Glimpses of World History. And these two books, don't forget, he wrote it in the jail, in prison, which means he did not have a library access. He did not, of course, have Google. If you have Google, you can write any number of books today. So Pandit Nehru, sitting in jail without any access to the external world, formulated our foreign policy in those two books, because he explained the ethos of India in the Discovery of India and the history of the world and the culture of the world in the Glimpses of World History. There was no single individual at that time or even today who has that kind of in-depth understanding of the world and India. So we were fortunate. And therefore, it was not, our foreign policy was not made by public discussion. It was not by a draft policy being circulated or anything. He just took it out of his head and created foreign policy. But the truth of the matter is, whoever may have made the foreign policy at that time, it would not have been different. Why? Because we had just become independent from a colonial power. After 200 years of colonial rule, India became independent. And a country like that would never have become part of the Western imperialist bloc. We could not have done that, because we struggled for 100 years in order to get freedom, and we were not going to walk into an American trap again. So any prime minister at that time would have chosen that. Just as democracy, we had no choice. Did we have a choice? Because we are all individually very democratic. So India can never be non-democratic. So just as democracy was natural to us, just as secularism was natural to us, because in a country of such multiplicity of religions, multiplicity of faiths, how could we have not secularism? So when Government of India said, or the Constitution said, that this will be a democratic, secular, socialist republic with a non-aligned policy, it was a normal thing for India to do. It was nothing artificial. We could not have joined the Western bloc because we had just broken out of imperialism. We could not have joined the Russian bloc or Soviet bloc because we had no great fancy for communism. Today, of course, communism exists only in India, particularly in Kerala, nowhere else in the world. But at that time, there was a communist world, but it was not attracted. We were not attracted by it. So it was a natural choice for us. So just for the sake of our discussion, I would categorize the various stages in the evolution of Indian foreign policy. Just for you to remember what has happened in the last 70 years or so. And then we can go into specific details as you want, what you want me to speak about. But since the time is short, I'll just give you a quick review as to how our foreign policy evolved. So, in the initial stages, India had a great advantage in the world because we were the only country at that time which had become independent by a peaceful, non-violent struggle. So, India's independence was a model for the world. In 1945, when the United Nations was established, there were only 51 members in the United Nations, including India. India had not become independent yet, but we signed the UN Charter. And today, how many are there? Do you know? 193 members. So where did they come from? From 51 to 193 in 70 years. All because all these countries were colonies at that time. Most of them were not independent. Of course, we added more by breaking up of the Soviet Union, breaking up of Yugoslavia, etc. But most of the 193 countries that are in the UN today were under colonialism when we became independent. So India stood as a democracy, of course, as a country which is non-aligned, and therefore India had a great attraction at that time. And if you ask me when was India the most popular in the world, it is not now, it is not last year, it is not year before last, not when we said India is shining, none of those. India was the most popular country in the world in our foreign policy, was at the period between 1947 when we became independent till 1962. That was the period India was considered an ideal democracy, a country which inspired anti-colonial struggle, a country which inspired the leaders of all these newly independent countries. Of course, the non-aligned movement itself was established only in 1961 formally. But Pandit Nehru had a vision of Asian solidarity. Then he had a vision of Afro-Asian solidarity. And therefore he thought that he will build a world, Afro-Asian world, which will counter the two blocks which were in existence. They were military blocks. So this was his ambition. And that ambition collapsed in 1962. That is why I am saying the first period is 1947 to 1962. And that is the time when the world offered India a permanent membership in the Security Council, which we did not accept. Pandit Nehru did not accept because the position that was offered to us was the position of the Communist China. To keep China out of the United Nations, the powerful countries of the world came to Pandit Nehru and said, please become a permanent member of the United Nations or Security Council and we will keep China out. And Panditji rightly, some people criticize him for that. Why did you grab it at that time? Maybe today we would have done that. But Panditji said, no, I do not wish to take the place of China. China's place has to be taken by China itself. And when we are ready to become a permanent member, we will let you know. And we have been letting them know since 1979 and nobody has offered it to us. So the situation changed dramatically. So this period from 1947 to 1962 was, I would say, the golden age in Indian foreign policy. Because we stood for anti-colonialism, we stood for anti-imperialism, we stood against apartheid, we supported Palestine, all very progressive policies of India. And India itself as an example of being independent without shedding a drop of blood. And the British imperialism collapsed without a gun being fired at them. And that was the period. And then we went to the United Nations, we talked about complete disarmament, we talked about equality, equity in economic relationship, we talked about human rights. So it was all India offering to the world what we can. So that is the contrast I am making. Now Mr. Modi's speeches, if you hear, what he is saying is, please give us A, B, C, give us Digital India, give us Make in India, make me permanent member of the Security Council. And for what? He doesn't say what he is offering to them. So we do not, our internationalist approach to the world has changed to a nationalist approach. Maybe it is good. I have no view on that. But we must remember that the change is dramatically different. And what happened in 1962? In 1962, China invaded India. And that is when India was exposed completely. Because we lost the war. Many of you will not remember 1962 because you were not born. But I remember 1962. It was the biggest blow to India's psyche. It was a total disaster. Some people in the army heard that the Chinese were coming 100 kilometers away and they ran. Because they didn't have ammunition, they didn't have guns, they didn't have vehicles. It was a pathetic reaction to the Chinese aggression, which we were not ready for. Panditji never imagined that there would be a Chinese aggression. V.K. Krishnan Menon never believed it. And therefore he did not buy anything for the army. He was the defense minister. Because we built our policy, defense policy or internal policy, on the presumption that we will be eternally friendly to with the Chinese. And the other mistake that Pandit Nehru made was taking Kashmir to the United Nations. Eternally India is in trouble because that one decision that Pandit Nehru made. Because he thought at that time, when the war broke out and when the Pakistanis occupied 1/3 of Kashmir, he could have got rid of them in one day. Because the Indian army was much stronger than the Pakistan army. And if he had ordered that the Pakistanis be thrown out, the Indian army would not have taken more than one day. But Panditji, being an idealist, decided that we will not do that. So he stopped the Pakistani aggression, but he went to New York to resolve the problem. A lesson we have always learnt. To speak to Pakistan across the border, why do you want to go to New York? Because he expected that the United Nations will be just, United Nations will be non-political, United Nations will be fair. But United Nations is none of these. United Nations is a body which was created by the winners of the Second World War in order to dominate the world. Simple as that. We keep on complaining, oh, why is Obama not doing this? Because Obama is not the Prime Minister of India. He is the President of the United States, and the United States has its own interests. If our interests coincide with his interests, he might smile at us. But the moment he feels that you are competing with him, he will destroy you. This is the law of the world. We should not expect any foreign power to be generous to you or kind to you. As they say in America, there is no free lunch. If somebody invites you to lunch, you must immediately know this man has something in his mind. He will not give you lunch without a price for it. So except for the presumption that we will have an Afro-Asian solidarity, and except for the mistake he made of taking the Kashmir issue to the United Nations, India was absolutely flawless in its foreign policy in that period. Then we come to the second period from 1962 to say 1989, till the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. What happened is during this period? Our stock went down considerably after our China experience. Then our growth rate, see, people respect you only if you are powerful, if you are strong, militarily and economically. So they looked at India. What was our growth rate, economic growth rate at that time? 3%, which was, they ridiculed it by calling it the Hindu rate of growth. And today we are talking about 11% growth, 10% growth, at least 7 to 8% growth. So this period between 62 to 1989, India's economic growth was 3%. And who came to our help in that period? When we needed to rebuild our industry, build our basic necessities, The only country which came to our help was Soviet Union. It was not because we had any particular ideological affinity with the Soviet Union, because the Communist Party was here, but Communist Party was never in power. But we thought that the socialist policies, planning process, for example, we adopted the 5-year plans from the Soviet Union. So we had a certain affinity because socialism means distribution of what you have. Capitalism is creation of wealth. So we believe that we must have an equitable society, and therefore we decided that whatever little we have, we will divide among all the people, and that is why the socialist society that we invented. So we developed an affinity with the Soviet Union. But there are other aspects. Soviet Union had the machinery, the war machinery of the world, even though it was never proved how good they were or better than the West, but they were willing not only to sell those weapons to us, because after 62 we realized we have to be strong, we have to be militarily strong. So when we are looking for weapons in the world, the only country which was willing to sell it to us was the Soviet Union. And that too at very low prices. Soviet prices were very low. And secondly, we had a rupee payment arrangement with the Soviet Union, in the sense that we would exchange our goods for steel factories we got, armament factories we got, planes and ships and everything. The basic infrastructure of India came from the Soviet Union because we had an advantage in pricing, not because of ideology. Because they were willing to buy our things. What were we selling at that time? The only things we had to sell were Ludhiana sweaters. No other country in the world will buy it. The quality is so poor. But Soviet Union would buy it. Panama cigarettes. Even Indians would not smoke Panama cigarettes. But the Russians would do that. So like that, our consumer industry, which was rather poor, was acceptable to the Soviet Union. So we were able to sell our Ludhiana sweaters and Panama cigarettes to the Soviet Union, and we got our steel industry, we got our armaments industry, we got your shipping industry, we got the aviation industry, all set by the Soviet Union. And therefore what happened? The whole world started to believe that we were a satellite of the Soviet Union. The word used was Sputnik, you know the word, no? It's a Russian word which means a satellite. So a misunderstanding was created. This we must be very clear. It was not an ideological affinity with the Soviet Union, but it was a necessity, and it was some kind of a coincidence that the Soviet Union came to our rescue at that time. And therefore, the Western countries rejected us completely. We had our basic relationship with all these countries, I am not suggesting that. But they felt, the Americans are of the view that if you are not with them, you are against them. This is their theory. They will, when you say you are independent, they say, oh, okay, then you are our enemies. That is how they look at it. There was a foreign minister called John Foster Dulles who said, if you are not with us, you are against us. And therefore, they were anti-India most of the time. They were critical of the Soviet Union. We thought we are supporting this evil empire, and therefore India's stock in the world was very poor from that period. And our economic strength wasn't good. We didn't have enough food to eat. We had to import wheat from the United States to keep our people free of hunger. That is the first time in Kerala we started eating wheat. Again, you will not remember, because there was no chapatis being made in Kerala, but there was no rice. So I remember my uncle who was in the army got a chapati stuff. For the first time we saw this, because people never knew that you could make chapatis and eat it. We could only eat rice. It was a necessity because we didn't have any rice. We had only wheat, and that too free wheat from the United States of all places. So you can imagine what kind of independent foreign policy you can have when you are not self-sufficient in food grains. We became self-sufficient in food grains in the 80s, 81, 82. That is when we felt greater freedom. Otherwise our freedom had no meaning. Because if American wheat did not come, we would be starving. Then how can you say anything against the United States? So this very unpleasant period in India's foreign policy was that. But we became more practical during that period. In the first period from 47 to 62, we were considered idealistic. And our going to the UN was one example of idealism on the part of India. We were preaching to the world, as it were. But after 62, we realized that we had to be independent. We realized that we have to cultivate other countries, and that struggle went on. I won't go into detail. So many things happened between that period. We had a nuclear test in 1974. We had the emergency in 1975. All these had implications for foreign policy. And then, in 89, lo and behold, the Soviet Union collapsed. So at that particular moment, we were shocked out of our wits. We were saying blocs are not good, military blocs must be abolished. That is what we were saying. But when Soviet Union disappeared and the Soviet bloc disappeared, we were very homesick. We were very nostalgic. Because we said we have no friends anymore. Who is going to look after us? Who is going to be our friend? And that big dilemma was handled by a great Prime Minister of India, whom you may not remember. But the best Prime Minister we could have at that time was P.V. Narasimha Rao. Because he has not been recognized as a great Indian Prime Minister. But he was the man who single-handedly, well, maybe Manmohan Singh was part of the exercise, change our economics, change our politics, change our foreign policy, everything in a few days' time. So from 1989, when Soviet Union collapsed, till 2014, till Sri Modi came to power, we have a different foreign policy. So foreign policy changed dramatically. We cultivated the United States. We became friendly to the United States. We started talking to them. We were friendly with other countries. We recognized Israel. We established diplomatic relations with Israel. Many changes we made in our foreign policy. Moved away. Of course, there was no Soviet Union to move away from. It was only Russia. Russia continued to support us with the supplies, etc., which even now we get 70% of all our military equipment from Russia. Don't forget that. Of course, Israel is the biggest supplier of arms to us, United States supplies to us, etc. But till today, 70% of our military hardware comes from Russia. Why? Because our industries are based on their technology. You cannot just throw away that technology. So we continue to do that. And Russia maintained that cooperation. Of course, the rupee payment arrangement is not there. Now you have to pay hard currency for that. So there was a total transformation of the relationship. And slowly and steadily, India started winning the respect of the world for 2 or 3 different reasons. One, our economy was opened up. It was liberalized economy and a globalized economy. Mr. Rao did not know what to do. He had to just jump into the water and swim because there was no guide, nothing, what to do with it. At one time, India had no money to buy our essential goods for more than 6 months. Our foreign exchange situation was so bad, they did not know what to do after 6 months because we need to buy our oil from abroad. There are so many things to be purchased. And Chandrasekhar was the Prime Minister for some time. That is when he took away all the gold from Indian Reserve Bank and sold it in the London market. It was poverty at its worst. And from there we recovered. Our economic growth came from 3% to 10 or 11%, 90, 91, 92 period. And that is how we recovered the lost glory of India's foreign policy. Of course, the challenges continued. Each occasion there was a challenge from one quarter of place of the world. Our relationship with Pakistan was a big challenge. Our relationship with China became even a bigger challenge. Our problems with our neighbors never got better. In spite of all that, in the international arena, in the global world, India regained its position. And India started giving a global view. As Panditji said, we have our dreams, but these are also the dreams of the world. That's what he looked at it. And that we maintained under Mr. Narasimha Rao and later. And therefore, we had a global vision. We were trying to resolve the problems of the world, not seeking anything from the world. See, what we have to get, we will get provided you deserve it. And you have to get it by giving something back. There is nothing one way about foreign policy. Foreign policy has to satisfy the rest of the world. You cannot have a totally independent foreign policy, because if it is a totally independent foreign policy, nobody else will like it. You have a customers. When you have a product, that product has to be sold. If you make Pierre's soap or Chandrika soap and nobody buys it, you can say the soap is very good, but it's no use. So totally free, independent foreign policy is like Pol Pot had a foreign policy like that. Today North Korea has a foreign policy like that. Nobody cares, right? Who cares about North Korea's foreign policy? Because it is only about themselves. So you have to gain the acceptance of the world while remaining true to your own faith. And that is what we managed to do during that period. And that is why we are able to solve many problems with our neighbors. Still, of course, neighbors were always behaving like that. And the growth of China was a major factor. China liberalized the economy in 1972 when Nixon made a secret trip to China. That is when China opened out their economy. There is no communism in China today. If you think China is communist, it is communist only in name. They are a capitalist country. So in 1972 they opened their doors, while we opened our doors in 1992. So we are behind China by 20 years, and that distance is growing every day. Because they had the advantage of having used the international market and international technology. That today China's economy is 4 times bigger than the Indian economy. They started lower than us, but they are 4 times more than the world, than the Indian economy. And the American money, the US money is more in China today than in the United States. Because the Chinese kept on buying all these US bonds, treasury bonds and so on, invested in the United States so much that if tomorrow China says, please give us all our dollars, United States will go bankrupt. Right? But China will not take it. What will they do with it? If you take the dollars, who will you give it to if the United States is not there? So China needs the United States so that they can use their dollars in the United States and get benefits for themselves. So China has become probably the second most powerful country in the world. And we are not third or fourth or fifth or 15th in terms of real power, in terms of real growth. So China has become the biggest challenge to India. And because of the border problem, China is a constant threat to us. We may be very romantic about Chinese communism and so on, but the reality is, by not settling the border dispute between India and China, they are a constant threat because we don't know where our border is. So occasionally the Chinese come into our territory, and when we make a big tamasha, we dance and we start screaming about it, then they'll say, oh, is this your territory? We did not know. And then they go back. Even when the Chinese Prime Minister was sitting on a swing with our Prime Minister in Ahmedabad, the Chinese soldiers are coming into Indian territory to show that this friendship is fine, but the border is not settled. So the Chinese have never shown any interest in settling this border. China has settled its border with all other countries, including Bhutan. But India, they not only have kept 34,000 square kilometers on the west of India, and they claim the whole of Arunachal Pradesh. I hope you know that. So it's a very serious problem. They consider people of Arunachal Pradesh to be Chinese. If an Arunachal Pradesh person from India goes for a Chinese visa, they tell him, you don't need a Chinese visa. Please go to China, we'll give you a Chinese passport. That is their position. When the Indian Prime Minister visits Arunachal Pradesh, they protest. Why has he come without our invitation? So ridiculous as that. Jammu and Kashmir people from Jammu and Kashmir cannot get a Chinese visa on their passports. They give you a visa on a piece of paper because they don't recognize Jammu and Kashmir as part of India. So apart from our own dispute with China, they have adopted the Pakistani position with regard to Jammu and Kashmir. And so there is a constant threat from China. And we have no hope of fighting a war with China to win it, whether it is regular war or nuclear war. They are much more powerful than us. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to resolve the problems with China. We are constantly meeting them. In fact, Indian prime ministers meet the Chinese leaders more often than Americans or anybody else who is friendly to us. And therefore we try to keep speaking to them so that they don't take another adventure on us. Because in 1962 when they were asked, why did you invade India? The answer was to teach India a lesson. Even today they say, we want to teach India a lesson. And what is the lesson they are trying to teach you? That you are not number one in Asia. Because 47 to 62, the whole world believed that India was the most powerful country in Asia. And they taught us a lesson that we are not. And if we at any time challenge them, question them, they will again teach you a lesson, they said. So we have our major threat is from China. But our policy is to be friendly, try to see what benefits we can get from each other. There are areas in which we can cooperate, like trade, like environment, etc. And so we do that. So this is like having a gunda next door to your house. What do? You cannot go and fight the gunda. What do? On Diwali you send in some sweets so that he doesn't think of coming and attacking you. That's what we are doing with the Chinese. Keeping them in good humor, trying to be reasonable with them, try to explain our position, give our historic evidence that where the border lies. But they say this will all be settled later. Later means hundreds of years or yugas. They want this to continue. Pakistan encouraged by the Chinese. With Pakistan we have no problem. We can fight with Pakistan anytime. And all the wars we had with Pakistan we won. And nuclear capability also we are better than the Pakistanis. So there is a threat from Pakistan, but there is no threat of danger to India from Pakistan of a complete nature like we have with China. So with all this, we have been able to develop our economy, our investments have gone up, we have good relations with many states in the world, our relations with the United States has improved beyond all dimensions in 2008 when we signed the nuclear deal with the United States. So Indian diplomacy has come back to a measure of importance in the world, but not the level of importance that we had before 1962. So today when we say that we would like to be a permanent member of the United Nations, only we say it, nobody else says it. Recently, a view was taken from various people as to who thinks that India should be a permanent member of the United Nations with veto. Only one country said it among the major powers, that was United Kingdom. Not even Russia. China, of course, no. United States, of course, no. Not even Russia said that India must be a permanent member with veto. So, I wrote an article in the Hindu on 27th of September. If you are interested, please look it up. On the Security Council. Giving the whole history as to why we cannot become a permanent member in a hurry. I'm sure most of you believe that we are just about to become one. We are not going to become one. Certainly not a permanent member with veto. Because nobody wants us to have a permanent membership without veto. So if we at all have permanent membership, we will get without veto. And even that is not easily available, so we may become a semi-permanent member of the United Nations. That is the best we can hope. We can go into those details if you are interested. Because it is not only the permanent members which object to it. Because if you want to become a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, you need 2/3 majority of the General Assembly plus the 5 permanent members. What is 2/3 of 193? Who is arithmetic here? Arithmetician. It's at least 140, right? We cannot get 140 votes for India to become a permanent member of the Security Council. And certainly you cannot get 5 permanent members' votes. And therefore, we are of course working on it, we are always arguing about it, we have given all the various reasons, but realistically, we cannot expect to become a permanent member of the United Nations, which is the most powerful body in the world in terms of the United Nations. So that remains an ambition on our part, and my own view is that we should not be screaming about it. The Prime Minister should not speak about it. Sit back. When we deserve it, they will come to you. Instead of that, we keep on screaming, we say we have a right to be there, we'll do this and that, but that is not going to succeed. What we need to concentrate is, my final thought is this, we have to cultivate as many countries as possible, because there is always mutuality of interest. There is no ideology left anymore. So each country you have to identify what you can get from them and what you can give in return. Because every foreign policy is that. Even our domestically, at home, what do? We try to get the best out of your parents by giving them the least, right? That is a negotiation take place every morning. You want so much pocket money, but they won't give it to you unless you give them a kiss. But you'll give them half a kiss. You won't give a full kiss to the parents, do you? Because you think it's your right to get your pocket money. So these negotiations in individual life, also in diplomatic life, you have to get the maximum out of the others by giving the minimum, and that is what we do. And we have succeeded it. Indian diplomacy is considered good all around the world, recognized as very capable, competent people, and therefore we have managed to bring India to the forefront of the world in spite of all these problems. Now, Mr. Narendra Modi has pursued the same policy in the sense that he has not changed the foreign policy of India. He is still independent, he still wants to have good relations with everybody, but the change that he has brought about is his arguments. If you read his speeches, the first argument he makes is India is a great country. We all believe in that. But the BJP seems to believe India is greater than what it really is. Because he always talks about, oh, you are talking about the Wright brothers. Before that we had the Pushpaka Viman. You are talking about nuclear weapons? Because we had the Brahmastra before that. So what is it that you are offering us? So India is a great country. He has this belief that India is a grandeur, an illusion of grandeur he has, which others don't recognize. Nobody will tell you that, oh, you had Pushpaka Viman before the Wright brothers invented the plane, and not something which the world will understand it. So he says India is a great country, it has immense possibilities, yes. The second, he says, India has now a great leader, a strong leader. He says that repeatedly. For the first time, you have a strong leader, decisive leader who has absolute majority. And what is the absolute majority? He has only 36% of the votes. He doesn't remember that. But he says, yes, he is the first Prime Minister after many years who has independent majority. The coalition is not required for him.